Long before the sands of Sinai swallowed Napoleon's soldiers, they buried the pride of medieval Christendom. In 1249, King Louis IX, saint, monarch, and warrior, launched his fleet toward Egypt, not to plunder, but to purify. He believed the Nile was the key to Jerusalem. But under the burning sun and rising pestilence, faith turned to fever. This is the story of the Desert Crusade, when Europe invaded Egypt and was swallowed whole. France in the early 1240s was a kingdom at peace, ruled by a king unlike any other. Louis IX was devout to the point of asceticism. He wore a hair shirt beneath his royal robes. He washed the feet of lepers. He heard Mass twice daily and distributed alms with his own hands. To his subjects, he was the embodiment of Christian kingship. To his nobles, he was sometimes an enigma, a king who seemed more monk than monarch. But in December 1244, everything changed. Louis fell gravely ill at Pontoise-les-Noyons, stricken with a form of malaria that nearly killed him. For days he lay in fever, hovering between life and death. His court prepared for the worst. His mother, Blanche of Castile, kept vigil by his bedside. And then, in the depths of that illness, Louis made a vow. If God spared him, he would take up the cross. He would lead a new crusade to free the Holy Land. He recovered. And he remembered his promise. News from the east made his vow seem not just pious but urgent. On August 23, 1244, Jerusalem had fallen once again into Muslim hands. The armies of the Sultan of Egypt had seized Damascus. The Christian kingdom of the east was collapsing. If aid from the west did not come soon, there would be nothing left to save. Louis' barons were not enthusiastic. They had seen crusades fail before. They had heard the stories of previous generations, of glory promised and disaster delivered. But Louis was insistent. For him, the cross was not a banner carried for political gain. It was destiny. He began preparations that would take years. He built a new port at Aiguimortes to serve as the embarkation point. He gathered supplies, negotiated loans, and commissioned ships. He recruited not just from France, but from across Christendom. England sent a detachment led by William Longespee, grandson of Henry II. Scottish lords joined. His own brothers, Robert of Artois, Charles of Anjou, and Alphonse of Poitiers, took the cross alongside him. His wife, Margaret of Provence, would accompany him, along with his brothers' wives. This would not be a quick raid. It would be an expedition of years, but the most crucial decision was strategic. Louis would not march directly to Jerusalem. He would strike at Egypt first. The logic was sound. Egypt was the heart of Muslim power in the Near East. It was rich, populous, and strategically vital. The Ayyubid dynasty that ruled it supplied the armies that defended Syria and Palestine. If Egypt fell, Jerusalem could be starved of reinforcements and supply. The Fifth Crusade had attempted the same strategy in 1280, briefly capturing Damietta before being forced to retreat. But Louis believed he could succeed where others had failed. On August 25, 1248, Louis IX embarked from Aiguimortes. His fleet comprised about 100 ships carrying 35,000 men. The sight was magnificent, white sails stretching to the horizon, banners snapping in the wind, the oriflamme of St. Denis leading the way. They knew the hymns of Jerusalem, but they did not know the winds of the desert. The fleet wintered in Cyprus, gathering supplies and waiting for stragglers. By spring 1249, the army was ready. On May 13th, a fleet of 120 large transport vessels assembled. On May 30th, Louis set sail. On June 4th, 1249, the fleet arrived off the coast of Damietta. Damietta was one of Egypt's most important ports, heavily fortified and considered nearly impregnable. It controlled access to the Nile Delta and the routes to Cairo. Taking it would be the first test of the crusade. Louis's advisors urged him to wait for the rest of the fleet to arrive. Only a quarter of his forces had sailed with him. The others were scattered across the Mediterranean, delayed by storms. But Louis refused to delay. At dawn on June 5th, he ordered the landing to begin. He was one of the first to leap onto the beach, planting the royal banner on Egyptian soil. What followed was almost miraculous. The Muslim defenders, led by the commander Fakhr al-Din, fought fiercely at the water's edge. But as night fell, something unexpected happened. The Egyptian Sultan, Al-Salih Ayyub, was dying of tuberculosis. His regime was fracturing. Fakhr al-Din, seeing the chaos in the city and fearing he could not hold it, made a fateful decision. He evacuated Damietta. The garrison fled. The civilians fled. They set fire to the bazaars as they left. On the morning of June 6th, the Crusaders entered the city to find it virtually undefended. Guillaume de Sonnac wrote in amazement that Damietta had been seized with only one Crusader casualty. The army rejoiced. It seemed the campaign was blessed by God himself. After years of preparation, the first objective had fallen in a single day. Knights sang hymns of thanksgiving. Priests held mass in the city's mosques, now hastily converted to churches. But the easy victory bred dangerous confidence. And it led to a fatal delay. Louis decided to wait in Damietta for reinforcements. His brother Alphonse of Poitiers had not yet arrived. Summer was approaching, and with it, the annual flooding of the Nile. The Crusaders, unfamiliar with Egypt's geography and climate, did not fully understand what that meant. The Nile was not just a river. It was Egypt's lifeline, its defense, and its weapon. When it flooded, vast areas of the delta became impassable. Roads turned to swamps, fields became lakes. Movement became nearly impossible. By the time Louis finally ordered the march toward Cairo in late autumn, the conditions had deteriorated dramatically. The Nile had swollen beyond its banks. The canals were overflowing. The muddy plains stretched endlessly. The Holy Army sank into a swamp of insects and fever. Horses died by the hundreds, their hooves rotting in the wet ground. Supply wagons became mired in mud. Ships that were supposed to travel up the Nile found themselves stuck in silt. And worst of all, disease began to spread. Dysentery struck first, the flux, as the chroniclers called it. Then came fever, possibly malaria or typhoid. Men who had survived the crossing of the Mediterranean now died shivering in their tents, their bodies wasting away. The camp became a charnel house. Still, Louis pressed forward. His objective was Al-Manshura, a fortified city that controlled the route to Cairo. If he could take it, the path to Egypt's capital would be open. But Al-Manshura was well defended. A canal separated the Crusader army from the city. For weeks, Louis's engineers tried to build a causeway across it, filling it with stones and timber. The Egyptians responded with Greek fire, that terrifying incendiary that burned even on water. The causeway burned. Men screamed as the flames consumed them. Finally, a local informant revealed the existence of a ford downstream. It was shallow enough to cross. On February 8, 1250, Louis ordered the attack. The plan was sound: cross the ford, attack the Egyptian camp, and then take the city. But it required discipline and coordination. Louis's brother, Robert of Artois, led the vanguard. He was young, brave, and hungry for glory. The crossing was successful. The Egyptian camp was overrun. And then, against Louis's explicit orders, Robert made a catastrophic decision. Instead of waiting for the main army to cross, he charged directly into Al-Manshura. At first, it seemed like genius. The streets were lightly defended. The knights swept through the gates. But then the trap closed. The streets of Al-Manshura were narrow, winding, and unfamiliar. The knights, in their heavy armor, could not maneuver. And waiting for them were the Mamluks, elite slave soldiers trained from childhood for war. They struck from rooftops, from alleys, from behind. They poured boiling oil from windows. They surrounded the knights and slaughtered them methodically. Robert of Artois was killed. So were most of his men. Of the 300 knights who had charged into the city, barely a handful escaped. When news reached Louis, he wept, but he did not retreat. He gathered what remained of his army and held his position outside the city. For hours, the battle raged. Louis fought personally, his courage and leadership holding the line. The chronicler Jean de Joinville, who was there, wrote of the king's self-possession in the midst of chaos. By nightfall, the Crusaders still held the field. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. Thousands were dead. The army was shattered, and the Nile turned red with blood. In the days after Manshura, the Crusader camp became a place of death. The Nile carried corpses downstream, thousands of them, bloated and rotting in the sun. The stench was unbearable. Flies swarmed in black clouds. And disease exploded through the army. Dysentery killed more men than swords had. The chroniclers wrote of soldiers too weak to stand, of knights vomiting blood, of corpses piled outside tents because there was no strength left to bury them. Food supplies ran low, then ran out. The Egyptians, now led by the Mamluk commanders Baybars and Kutus after the Sultan's death, had cut off the river. Crusader supply ships could not get through. The army began to starve. Louis prayed while his soldiers died in the mud. He distributed his own rations to the sick. He visited the dying, heard their confessions, held their hands as they slipped away. But faith, no matter how strong, could not feed an army or cure a plague. By early April, the situation was hopeless. Louis ordered a retreat to Damietta. It was not a march. It was a death march. The army stumbled north along the Nile, harassed at every step by Mamluk cavalry. Men collapsed and were left behind. Horses died in their tracks. The sick were carried on litters until the bearers themselves fell. They marched no longer in ranks. But in agony, Louis himself fell ill with dysentery. He could barely sit his horse. His attendants begged him to ride ahead to safety. He refused. He would not abandon his men. On April 7, 1250, near the village of Farisker, the Mamluks surrounded what remained of the Crusader army. There was no escape. The knights were too weak to fight. The foot soldiers could barely stand. Louis IX, King of France, the most pious monarch in Christendom, knelt in the sand and surrendered. The king who wore a crown of gold would now wear chains of iron and pray still. Louis was taken to Al-Mansura and imprisoned. Most of his army was captured or killed. Thousands of crusaders died in captivity from disease and mistreatment. Others were sold into slavery. But Louis himself was treated with a certain dignity. The Mamluks recognized his value both as a hostage and as a figure of respect. He was a king, after all. And even in captivity, his faith and composure impressed even his captors. Jean de Joinville, who was imprisoned alongside him, wrote that Louis never wavered. He prayed his hours. He tended to sick prisoners when he could. He wrote letters home with calm acceptance, saying that God's will was being done. It was a faith tested in fire, and it did not break. The Mamluks demanded a ransom, 400,000 dinars, and the surrender of Damietta. It was an enormous sum. But Louis agreed. In May 1250, after pledging not to return to Egypt, Louis was released. He surrendered Damietta and sailed to Acre with his surviving brothers. But instead of returning to France in shame, Louis did something unexpected. He stayed in the Holy Land for 4 more years. He rebuilt fortifications. He negotiated treaties with Muslim leaders. He ransomed prisoners. He worked tirelessly to strengthen what remained of the Crusader kingdoms. He came to conquer Egypt and left conquered by grace. When Louis finally returned to France in 1254, he was a changed man. The court that greeted him was subdued. There were no triumphal parades, no songs of victory. The Seventh Crusade had been a disaster by every military measure. Tens of thousands had died. Vast sums had been spent. And not a single inch of the Holy Land had been reclaimed. But Louis did not see it as failure. He saw it as trial. He became even more devout. He funded hospitals and leper houses. He supported the poor and dispossessed. He reformed the French legal system, becoming known for his justice and wisdom. He became the model of Christian kingship, not through conquest, but through humility. In 1270, he would take the cross one last time for the Eighth Crusade. He would sail not to Egypt, but to Tunis. And there, in another desert, he would die of dysentery. But the man who failed in Egypt would later be called Saint. The Seventh Crusade became a spiritual victory born of defeat. Egypt's sands erased footprints and pride alike. The Crusaders learned too late. The desert cannot be conquered, only survived. The holy wars of the desert ended not with glory, but with wisdom. In Egypt, the Nile has always risen and fallen, a rhythm of life, death, and renewal. The crusade that sought to master it found only humility. King Louis came seeking victory and met God in defeat. The desert took his army, but gave him a soul. And in the silence of the Nile, one truth remains, that no crown shines brighter than faith kept in failure. The river still flows past the ruins of Al-Mansura. The sands still cover the bones of those who marched with crosses sewn to their tunics. And somewhere beneath the dust lies a crusader sword, half buried, forgotten. A reminder that faith can light the world, but the desert bows to no one.